Billy here. Whoa. I hate these 220 volt plugs. European plugs. Ugh. Oh, the cheap outlets. They never fit right. They just fall out. They don't stay in, and then they sizzle. They just cook. They make tiny little arcs inside them, and you can hear them. So it's like bacon frying. And they get hot. They'll sizzle a long time without getting hot enough to melt or burn the house down. And then you pull it out and there's no visible signs of arcing on it. So they're real tiny arcs. They're loud enough to hear though. I have to arrange my plugs just right and hang the cords up so it's just got the right amount of tension on it, or I'll lose my battery. I'll be on I'm on the charger and I'm working, and then I see my battery's low. Well, I turn my air down a little bit. The electricity's sizzling. It's not making a contact. It happens a lot. Minor thing. We had outlets. It's not a European's fault. It's just not the design. It's these cheap outlets. Everything you go to buy, it's just super cheap crap, made in China, usually. Well, always. It's made out of Chinesium. They use really crappy alloys. Alloys. I'm getting my news feeds mixed up. Let's just make this a technical feed, okay? They use really cheap alloys, poorly made alloys, paper thin, and they enclose them in plastic that's also paper thin as typing paper, and poorly formulated. Everything they make starts shrinking and cracking and breaking apart after a couple of years. So I've refurbished my stuff in my apartment several times. You just got to keep replacing stuff. I grew up in a house where things were made out of porcelain or Bakelite electrical outlets. And they were probably 30 or 40 years old when I was there. And they're probably still in the same house, and they still plug in and stay, and they make a good connection. Why is everything made like crap now? Well, my computer shut off because it wasn't plugged in, although it looked like it. I'll show you this stuff and sitting here talking about it all. That's the culprit right there, this cheap piece of crap here. And the outlets and the walls. The one behind that cabinet sizzles a lot. It took a long time to get it positioned where it would quit sizzling. The inside plumbing of a toilet does the same thing. My apartment, I've replaced the guts of the toilet like probably 7 or 8 times in the last 10 years. Because the only ones you could buy are made in China. And they're paper thin plastic. And the plastic is formulated where it just shrinks and cracks and dissolves within a few years. I think the one I've got in it now in my house, I found one that's made in Germany. They started getting better stuff here after the referendum. And it's lasted a few years at least. It works every time. I haven't ever had to adjust it like every week. I don't know what they do when I'm gone. Guess they're going to find out. Anyway. Normal, ordinary people see all this stuff. You have to live every day. You have to deal with all this stuff, all this crap that doesn't work and is poorly made. And it just occurred again, my phone's not charging. And it's everything. I mean, I'm going to go on. It sounds like I'm belly aching, but I got a point. I'm going to come to it. And I got some really good links to share with you because this all ties together. It always ties together. I have a German car, or my wife has a German car. I bought it for in 2008, I think. It's an Opel Vivaro. The way they make things in Europe, it's always been a little sketchy to me, to Americans. I mean, most Americans, unless you're a European car aficionado, you probably don't even know it, but there's manufacturers in Europe that make their own engines, and then they hire different companies to make the bodies. Coach builders, it's a tradition. And then there's companies that only make engines. And then there's companies that only make bodies and don't make engines, and they buy somebody else's engines to put in them. That's why you can buy. I know this stuff because I kind of got a thing for silly old French cars. It's a weird habit. But I also worked at an exotic car shop in Houston a long time ago. But that's why you could buy a Citroen that has a Maserati engine in it. I mean, the Citroen bought engines from Maserati to put in them because they were really tight, powerful engines instead of their own more mundane utilitarian engines. So they bought the Maserati engine for, say, the SM back in the 70s. Hell of a car. Anyway, I worked on British cars, French cars, German cars, Volvos, Swedish cars, Saabs. This is back in the 80s. And most of the stuff I worked on was older, stuff people bring in from the 60s and 70s. Oh, don't forget Fiats. Got a lot of them in there too. And you could see the culture. I've talked about this before. You could see the culture in the engineering, the way they built stuff. You can see this is French. This fits with the French the French style, the French way of thinking. If you're dealing with an old Renault or a Citroen or a Peugeot, and same thing with English. English cars are silly, so they're motorcycles. But it's a nice, friendly, eccentric, warm English kind of silly, and it works. Oh, I hear the electrical sizzling again. Oh crap, it's that one again. Just a minute. The things you gotta do. Okay, I think we're good. I worry about that one. I had it set, it hasn't given me any fits in a long time, and now I'm monkeying with these, and now that one's going off. Oh, it is this one. I don't know if I got these on or not. I was YouTubing. I can't believe this. It's amazing how shitty things are. This whole place needs to be just rewired. I had to rewire my apartment. Or my erstwhile apartment. Put all new Siemens breakers in, copper wires. Because the Soviets used aluminum wire. This is the wire of the future. My place was built in 1960. It had aluminum wires. But the breakers were, they didn't have breakers, they had fuses. There's this giant porcelain jar that this other jar screws into, and had a piece of copper in there of the correct thickness. But the contacts had gotten so bad, I replaced it and put a Siemens breaker in it. And that was simplicity. And if it had been taken a little better care of, it'd probably still work. But everything else is aluminum. Anyway, where am I going with all this? I remember the American cars. They were done with American sensibilities. Totally different than Europeans. Totally different than Russians. The American cars of the 60s, late 60s, you might squeak off some early 70s in there, but it's basically the late 60s. That was the pinnacle of style, of workmanship, of design, and every freaking thing on it was made in America, by golly. Everything. And they were beautiful. I mean, the doors closed with real solid tongues, like a bank vault. They were that thick. They had a lot of real metal in them. They performed quite well. Europeans would make fun of it, Why do you need an engine if that's big? Well, yeah, you're driving in West Texas. It's nice to float along at 100 miles an hour for hours at a time. I've done it. 3,500, 3,800, or 4,000 pound car. Just relaxing. I guess that's a thing of the past. But these things, these machines, these things that we live with, our chariots, our household items, they're cultural artifacts, especially the chariots. That's where they really put all their pride into it, and your culture. They're cultural artifacts. And you people that follow the Tataria stuff know that there's been an effort for hundreds of years to, well, at least the last 120 or so, to destroy cultural artifacts. Magnificent buildings and technology from the distant past. There's always like some kind of fugazi excuse, this cheap, made-up, phony excuse. You got to tear it down real quick and get rid of it. Look at the skyline in England. Wars do a lot of it for us, but even without wars, they're always knocking them down for no good reason and putting up something really brutal and ugly and cheap. And then they convinced the kids that 100 years ago we were nothing but cavemen, or 200 years ago anyway. 150 years ago we were just cavemen. They were all bigots and homophobes and misogynists and brutal people, and modern society is just so wonderful. We've just come up with this stuff just now, and we're going to the future. Listen to us, and we'll doctor your DNA, and we'll put a chip in you, and you'll have driverless cars that take you where we think you need to go. It's all lined up the Great Reset. But you got to destroy some of these artifacts, because these artifacts speak to people in a lot of ways they don't even understand. It's not materialism. There's symbology in it, and there's also logic. You go look at something that was made for common people to buy, a reasonable price car that any family could afford. People worked at that factory. The wife could stay home and take care of the kids. They could buy a house and own it, without having to wait 30 years to get it, paid for. Kids could go to school. You could eat well. You could go out. You could go on vacations making these things, and you could afford to buy one. It's not like that anymore. They kind of propped it up for a while with the petrodollar and the loans and the low interest rates, but they got you there. It's all going down the tubes. It's over. The parasites ate it out from the inside, and we let them. It's not the Chinese. It's the bankers. It's the finance people. It's the speculators, and it's your Congress critters. It's all the bureaucrats. It's all the bureaucracy. It's all the people that didn't actually make anything in their life for a living. They never had any value added. They managed things. Well, we need some management, but not nearly what we've got. And most management is useless, especially government management. All they do is interfere with things, and they're parasitic. They suck everything out. And then you get the top level of management where they can take your tax money and give it to the Israelis or the Ukrainians or scientific studies to find out things. Why do they do that? Well, they are stupid, but they also get kickbacks from all of it and more power. And this has been building on itself for, the past 60 years. Well, yeah, it really started 60 years ago. It really started in earnest probably in the early 70s. Well, when they made the currency into pure fiat, and they signed all these agreements with the oil companies. Nixon went to China. in 71 or 2. I have an aunt, my dad's older sister. She was in that group that went to China for the first time. She was some sort of bigwig in the Red Cross and the USO. I don't know why they invited her, but she wasn't evil or anything. She was a really sweet woman. She was kind of a dingbat. She was really absent-minded, and she was good looking too. So, so she had some connections. She's seen some stuff. She was in Japan during the occupation, in Egypt back in the 50s, and boy, she could tell stories if you could keep her focused enough to finish one. Nixon went to China and began the process of blessing the financial sector, because it's a lot better for them to get things made in China and shipped over here. For a while, it's not sustainable, and now we're approaching the end. They made their money, and they got their geopolitical objectives accomplished, and now we're going to go back to feudalism if they get their way, with the Great Reset, where you will own nothing. And all the reasons that they have where it's necessary to have a Great Reset to save the planet, to save the environment, and to create equality and stop crime. Those things are all caused by them. They've been managing things. It's the same people. They set things up the way they are. People are sick and starving in Africa because of their diamond companies and their extraction companies and their cotton companies. The way they've managed things has made people extremely poor. The way they've managed things has polluted the earth, and it's going to get a lot worse. They want you on an electrical system. They want all the cars to be electric. They want everything to be digital and have all these rare earth minerals in it. Well, they want you to have an electric car to save the environment. They're still going to have lots of oil, because you got to burn millions of gallons of diesel oil to extract those minerals for your lithium batteries. And they only last a couple of years. And then you got hazardous waste that you can't get rid of. It's not about the environment. They know that. They can't be that stupid. Well, they are pretty dull, but they're dull-witted and stupid in a real short-term way of grabbing things for themselves and building their system to enslave everybody. And if you think that you're supporting them to go green and save the planet, well, you're a freaking idiot, and there's no excuse. Stupid or evil, it doesn't make any difference. It leads to the same place. And as far as I'm concerned, you're an enemy combatant. Back to our cultural artifacts. They're getting rid of them. That's what cashless for clunkers is about. I've always kept old stuff. The last vehicle I had was in the States was a 1970. It was an Olson van with a Chevy straight six and a 4-speed. There isn't anything on that I couldn't fix on the road. And I wouldn't have to, because I could look at everything and see that it's okay. I could pull the floor panel up and pull the top off the transmission and look at it and see what kind of shape the gears and bearings were in. And I could shake things and put pressure on them and see, well, this tranny's in great shape. Not going to have any problems with it. Make sure it's full of oil, put it back together. I've spent like 10 minutes. I could do everything on that vehicle like that. I could check everything out before I took a trip, carry a spare belt, a spare set of points and condenser. And if something does happen, I won't be on the road more than like 20 minutes. I carried a spare alternator, for crying out loud. And I could make it work. I could make it run. With a sharp stick and a rock, I keep going. They don't like stuff like that. I've had modern cars, fairly modern. Everything's fine far as I know. I can't check inside the little black boxes and look at them, see if they're okay, and all these complex systems that are tied together. I'm driving down the road happy as a clam, get up on this long interstate bridge, and then poof, it just stops. Well, you have to have diagnostic equipment to find out what went wrong. $1,000 tow bill, all that. I've abandoned cars like that. Well, they were cheap cars anyway. I bought used. But I'm not wrapping up $1,000 in a towing bill and then paying some shop another $1,000 to find the problem, and it's some little gimcrack. I did everything I could to try to find the problem, and I couldn't. I left it there. I gave it to somebody. Says there's a free car there if you want it. I found the local handyman guy in a small town nearby, and he was blessed. He'll do something with it. That's just how I roll. But anyway, I had this Opel instead of a Stopel, and everything started going south on it. It's got plastic switches, and the ignition switch is all plastic. The ignition switch went out. All I knew what it was. It didn't work anymore. It's real hard to get them out because they're anti-theft systems, right? I get it out. You can't buy it anymore. Opel doesn't sell it. Opel only sells, they change them a little bit every year, so they quit selling the older ones, and the newer one won't fit. So I had to get a Chinese repop. Now the Chinese make retro stuff that retrofits other machines, older stuff. But they're awful. They're like these outlet things. I put the Chinese one in there. Well, the Opel one went out. The car was like, it was a 2005, and this is a few years ago. So it was like way over 10 years old. It shouldn't have ever went out, though. I guarantee you, I could go to a junkyard. If you could find an old, like a 67 Pontiac laying out in the junkyard, that ignition switch still working that thing. You could find one that's been driven all the time and it'll still work. It's been turned thousands and thousands of times and it still feels good. It still works. Ignition switches started going south in America in the early 70s when they put all the lock stuff on them. Started making them out of thinner material and cheaper material. Then they started getting catchy where they put cheap lock sets in them too. That's another thing. But I bought a 62 Plymouth that sat out in the junkyard for years. And I got it going and nothing worked on it. The wipers, the lights, the heater. All I did was I sit there and played with the switches because I know how they work. They had a real thick, high quality copper spring in it. And it would drag across and catch the contacts. And it had been sitting there, and of course they got corroded. They got patina. They got the little green goo that copper turns into. The little oxidization, copper oxide is green. That would build up on it. So you just keep flicking it, and it kind of wipes it off. Didn't have to take them apart. I flicked every switch about 60 or 70 times, and everything started working. And I drove the car for a few years, never had any problem. Everything worked. I fixed it by using it. They don't make things like that anymore. Now they use plastic springs. They use folded and bended plastic stuff. You can look up on the websites of these engineering companies and tell you why it's better. How many times are you going to bend a piece of plastic and have it not break? The formulations are out the window anyway. The quality's just gone because they're made in China too. They make more profit when stuff doesn't last long. We all know this. There's no competition. The same few corporations. BlackRock owns everything, and they can do that now. Nobody's going to step in and make something that lasts longer for a competitive price. Except you can. If you form organizations, and somebody could build a platform online to facilitate home manufacturing. This stuff is not difficult to make. If you can access the stuff that you need, and I suggest you're coming on hard times in America, buddy. You need to find all this old stuff that's got heavy pieces of metal and copper in it and squirrel it away because it's going to be valuable. They're trying to clean it all out and get rid of it. Cultural artifacts, these cars, as I was saying before I was interrupted by my Chinese electric stuff, they speak to people. Even a little kid can look at a 68 Pontiac Bonneville. No matter what kind of condition it's in, if it's usable, he can open and close the door, and that door is going to tell him a story about his people. heavy door